Takže dobré odpoledne po vydatném a příjemném obědě. Ráda bych vás pozvala na pokračování inovační konference, tentokrát na panel budovy a stavebnictví, který moderuje Petr Matyas, předseda představenstva odborné rady pro buildingSMART. Vítám vás.
Petr Matyas, who is the member of the Technical Council, Petr Stepanek, advisor at the Ministry of Regional Development, and he also teaches at the Czech Technical University, and Ondrej Sramek, corporate issues, Knauf insulation. Thank you very much, and we'll start with the discussion. Welcome back to our panel. To start with, I would like to say that we have microphones available here, so if you have any question or you want to make a comment, do not hesitate. Buildings. Buildings as such consume approximately 40% of energy, and they represent about 36% of CO2 or carbon emissions. And if we look at it more closely and elaborate a little bit on the figures, then we see that there are two stages of existence of the building. The first stage would be the operations of the building. That means the consumption during the operation of a building, which is 40 years or more. And of course, we have more energy efficient buildings today, but it is the users that determine the consumption of the building. So on the one side, we build more efficient buildings. On the other side, the users have higher and higher requirements. And this is something that the building industry cannot really influence. If you look at the data on square meters per office building per employee, then we see that we have the double of square meters per employee compared to the situation 20 years ago. So even if we have buildings that are twice as energy efficient, will still consume the same amount of energy, which is due to the consumers. The consumers do not change their lifestyle, their behavior, their requirements, and it means that we cannot save that much energy. If we are able to decarbonize and save, we can do it in the area of heating. It depends whether we burn fossil fuels or not, but this doesn't depend on the industry, because we know that the Czech Republic imports 9 billion cubic meters of gas a year, and we burn it. And if we want to replace this, we can, of course, replace it with clean energy, but it will mean that we will need many terawatt hours of electricity, which is approximately the equivalent of the output of the Temelin power plant per year. So there are some solutions, some improvements possible, but it does not depend that much on the industry as such, because first we need the energy and then we can do something about it. Then the second stage of energy consumption is the construction of the building itself. Here we can have a say, because in the building industry there is quite high level of inefficiency. Some say that it is up to 50%. So these are all the activities that do not generate value added. In the industry as such, the inefficiency levels are much lower. So here we have quite a lot of space for improvement. That is why I'm so happy to have my colleagues here who are experts in construction, material production, and also education, because they are those who can help us improve efficiency. And if we want to improve efficiency in construction, we have to talk about digitization, about legislation, legislative framework, and we have to talk about the customer relations. First, I will give the floor to Mr. Krestan from Metrostav. Good afternoon. I'll start by continuing with what has been said already. I have a very simple slide here. The slide basically shows what we started to do when we thought about our vision in terms of energy and climate and sustainability. So we try to find out what we can do. And we came to the conclusion that we cannot change anything on our own, that we can only contribute to the chain. In other words, that we need to cooperate with the whole environment and the whole society that surrounds us. So that is why we are also here today, and we were present yesterday during the official launch. So the process, as it is mentioned here, the contractor is just one part of the chain. And the contractor can have a vision, but what is important is to have a whole concept, a whole strategy that will determine everything. So it means it includes the designer, it means the contracting party, the user. But there are also other parties, such as the building authorities and similar institutions that also have a say. And this is very important for us to be able to implement the vision that we define. I would like to talk about two materials that we've been using, and these are sustainable materials. Both of them had been developed together with TGB Metrostav, and both are used already. The first is EcoCrete concrete, which is a type of concrete that replaces aggregates with a recycled material. It is innovative material, but it has been on the market for quite some time already. But finally, the time is mature for us to start using such products. 5 or 7 years ago, if somebody said, I want recycled concrete, then it would be quite difficult. Today, we are able to use it for foundations, even in the structure. And I'm sure that with time we will be able to use it basically anywhere, even in ceilings, whenever there is quite a lot of pressure. And this year we have already sold tens of thousands of cubic meters of such material already. So it is successful, but we also have to be able to create this recycled material, to have it certified and be able to produce it. So this is the second challenge. We've been talking about circular economy. We want it to function, but we need all these elements in place first. And the second material I want to mention is the high-value concrete. It's called the UHPC concrete. It hasn't been used here a lot in the Czech Republic yet. The problem with this material is that it's difficult to process it. It's very dense. It's a very demanding material for processing. You have to learn how to work with it. We've learned it already. We know how to use it now, and we have the first examples of its usage. This is one bridge where it was used, and it is an important material also from the point of view of emission reduction. So if you can use it, it helps the reduction of emissions, and it can be used mainly for reconstruction of bridge structures because it helps increase the life of bridges, and it also has better physical characteristics. And if we really use it, it will also contribute to sustainability, climate, and energy savings. So this is my concluding remark, that we should be able to design and use materials for the purpose they are designed for. If we don't do it, then we will continue being inefficient and we will not be able to to get the benefit that it can offer. And if we do it properly, then sustainability will be better. So we have to use our common sense.
The second panelist is my colleague Petr Stepanek, who will mention the topic we heard nothing about in the morning, but from the point of view of decarbonization and sustainability, he will talk about the most important commodity, educated technicians. We talk about decarbonization, but there is a big problem. Without a young generation of technicians, we cannot improve. And in civil engineering faculty, we can see that young people are no longer interested in the technical issues like we have to change and rethink the relationship of a young generation to the technical disciplines. But we can't cope even with the elder generations. I've got a simple answer to your question. The first part is as follows. At a Czech Technical University or a chemical faculty of the Technical University, some programs reflect the need of innovated knowledge in practice, digital literacy, BIM and others, and capacity to apply sustainable approaches is a part of the basic curriculum of knowledge. The transport faculty and the faculty of architecture have got a common smart cities program. We also cooperate with the Czech Institute of Informatics and Robotics. There is a research held, and the outputs of this research are being implemented. The universities use them for their own projects. The chemical faculty has got their own sustainability program. I'm not the eldest person here in the hall, but I'm the last generation which was able to study in a non-digital way. I studied architecture and I was able to submit a thesis written on a typewriter. So we were able to use ink to write, and still I've got a quarter of a century ahead of an active life. We could still work this way at the beginning of the 90s. If you go to Berlin to shop, drink, work, whatever, why don't you visit a Pergamon museum where there is 3,000 to 4,000 years plan of a house, not very different from the houses we live in today. And the difference of those thousands years, the difference between the design on a plate and the technology we used in the 90s, that is the ink, is much lesser than the difference between the ink and the digital tools that we use today. So tertiary education is able to respond to the demand in a flexible way. But what we need is continuous education of people who work in a particular area. Here we need rethinking. We have to support change of competence, and digitalization and innovation in a number of disciplines will mean an end to professions like a drawer or static engineer. We have to update the competencies under the paradigm of sustainability and digitalization. That's all for the first round.
Thank you. I am the chair of the BIM Council. I'm not the youngest in the room either, I have to say. Then, Mr. Sramek, Knauf installation, you represent the part of the building industry that falls under industry. At the beginning, I mentioned the 36% of CO2, of carbon, and 40% of energy associated with buildings, and nobody really assesses how it is divided between the part that falls under the industry and the part that is the assembly and construction and the part that is operations. So we basically prepare strategies, but we work with data that is very imprecise and very raw. Thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation. I'll try to say a couple of words from our point of view. You have mentioned it already. So we represent the industry. In other words, we consume energy to produce insulation, but at the same time, we deal with the energy crisis and we look for solutions to the energy crisis because our materials put on to the buildings help to find solutions to the energy crisis. I have some simple pictures here. This is prepared by my colleagues, and this is a very simplified view of the energy system. We can imagine it as a tub. First, you have the tap where you bring energy, and on the other side, you have a drain. That means the energy is leaking from the tap. And we like to use this picture because it shows that in the last decades, we focused on the supply side, the production of energy. But after the energy crisis started, most of the discussion focuses on the alternative fuel, the LNG. The minister goes to Oman and searches for material. We're looking for new sources of LNG to fill our tanks. And we say, yes, obviously, this is important. It is important for the government to deal with it, but we will, of course, welcome if our tanks are full, but on the other side, we also need to devote some attention to dealing with the leakages through which the energy is leaking. So if instead of the tap, I imagine there is a building, a residential building, for instance, family houses, where approximately 1/2 of our population lives, or other residential houses, then there is enormous potential to stop these leakages of energy. So this is a topic that is missing in the discussion. I understand this is a long-term objective. First, we have to deal with the immediate problems. If you have people demonstrating at the Wenceslas Square, it is obvious that the government will try to deal with it immediately, but I think that it's time now to start thinking about the strategic question so that next year we do not have the same problem. The fact that our tanks are full, that's great, but this is not the last winter we will have. Next year there will be another winter and we may be facing the same problem again. And the second chart, how fast buildings cool down. Unfortunately, we do not have Eastern Europe here, but this is a chart that shows the number of degrees the building cools down in 5 hours if you stop heating the building. So let's imagine a catastrophic scenario. There is no gas available. All the heating plants stop working. It is a major crisis. And we see that in the UK, in 5 hours, imagine 5 hours. The government just has time to meet. So the temperature in Britain, in the buildings, will go down by 3 degrees. In the Nordic countries, where the energy standards are much higher, the temperature will drop by less than 1 degree only. So if you have a resilient system of buildings, then you have more space. You are not that vulnerable to a crisis. Unfortunately, in Eastern Europe, the situation is not very good. We'll probably do better than in the UK, where the buildings are not really insulated. But I think that we are comparable to what we see in France, maybe. So we will be in orange, in the orange zone too. This is just something to discuss.
I'll skip the slides of the colleagues who have not arrived, and I've got a first question for all panelists. It's only 3 of us. So, should you have any questions, please go ahead and ask them. What adjustments have you done, plan to do in your company in response to the current energy challenges? And how do these adjustments fit into your strategy? So, the floor is yours. We've got a decarbonization strategy, of course, and I can tell that majority of the industry has got investment cycles. Manufacturing plant in the Czech Republic. It is the glass-making tank from which we manufacture insulation. Every 10 years, we can make an investment decision and change the technology and move forward. And before that, when the tank must be heated and it can't cool down, we can apply energy management measures, and there is some potential in units. We have to have a long-term government strategy. And the industry usually is not able to respond immediately. It functions in long-term investment horizons. It must be able to make investment decisions in the long term.
Thank you, Mr. Stepanek. Can you elaborate on the topic? We, about a year or 2 years ago, we innovated our programs, and we have the EA programs now. That means that these are programs that include sustainability management. And the reason for this step is simple. We live in a professional bubble or sectoral bubble, and we do not need to convince us because we would be convincing the convicted. But if we get out of this professional bubble, then we find ourselves in a world when we talk to civil servants or decision makers, they will share with you horrible stories of dangerous passive buildings or electric cars that explode and so on. And we need to educate them. And this is the role of the educational sector. We have to educate people and also get involved in applied research. Thank you. Then the next question was for Mr. Krestan from Metrostav, but we have been cooperating with Metrostav on several projects, therefore I can answer on his behalf. The question is, what are the key challenges that your company faces now? And I can say what are our challenges as architects who cooperate with Metrostav. Well, the first is the shortage of building materials on the market. So if we as architects say we want a specific type of concrete, we can be sure that we will not find them because most of it comes from Ukraine. Whenever we have a suggestion for changes in the project, it's not about material that is cheaper or of better quality. The question that you have to answer is it available? Is the material available on the market? So whenever you want to change a project, it's what determines whether you can do it or not is not the price or the quality, but the availability of the material on the market. I believe that would be the answer of Mr. Krestan. And
Mr. Stepanek has already responded to the first point. How does your university prepare students and reskill buildings? And this is a question for Mr. Stepanek. Insulation for building renovations. Are you able to increase your production to meet the likely greater demand in future years? Yes, this relates to what you said, the lack of material. The situation is improving, but deteriorating on the other hand because the energy prices are skyrocketing and planned projects are being suspended. At the stage of project preparation, we will experience a slowdown that will be translated into our work as we are at the end of the chain. However, the demand increase is dramatic. We want to invest into the increase of our capacity. We have acquired a partner in Romania recently, and our material has got a very long service life, so this will help us. We have invested into the manufacturing plant of blown insulation, and we've got always a decade and make a big investment every decade. We've got 4 more years to go before such big investments, so we would need a crystal ball.
A question for Mr. Tuma from Strabag, but Mr. Strabag cannot attend. But the question is about building information modeling, BIM, which is an innovative instrument for preparation and implementation and operation of buildings. And the question is, does the Czech Republic proceed sufficiently fast in this context? I can answer again. The Czech Republic in 2016 and 17 adopted the strategy of BIM implementation and digitization implementation. The strategy was drafted by my council that I chair. We cooperated with Metrostav and with many other companies. At that time, we were among the first countries in Europe, or the British were the first, so we were among the first to adopt such a strategy at the government level. 5 years later, we have nothing. Unfortunately, the situation is that whenever the public administration starts dealing with an issue, everything gets frozen. In 2020, we have the law on digitization in the construction industry adopted. Then we had the first tenders for the suppliers. Then the next government cancelled all the tenders, and we will start from scratch again. So the conclusion is that we always come up with a great, big system. Then we discover that it is very complicated, and we complicate it even more, and in the end we have nothing because we cannot deal with it at all. And this is the reality of digitization too. And that will also be covered by the Mentimeter question when we will talk about strategy. I have to admit that I'm very scared of big global strategies. I think that Professor Zelený, a great name in the Czech Republic, said it, that in today's changing times, it is important to make the first step. In other words, in digitization, in all the processes, you have to take small steps and avoid focusing on the big global strategies, because whenever there is something like COVID or the war in Ukraine, then it will all break down. So we wanted to have a big strategy, and we have nothing today. And now I turn to the public. If you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. And if not, then we were able to respect the time slot that was allotted to us. And I see a question there.
My question is the following. 15 years ago, I was at the introduction of the renewables, and now I've got a question. Why in the construction the market leaders like Knauf introduce the natural materials that slowly in construction? I'm talking about insulation and about hemp and so on. Why does it take so long? Why it's not available on the market? Well, we don't introduce it because, in our opinion, it's not our core business. Mineral fiber is our core business. And as for the sustainability, if you carry out an analysis, LCA analysis, and have a look at the product, often it's not the case that the natural materials are better. Often you have to use various chemicals to treat them, and plastic. So it's not that we would be against it. Our strength is our core business. So I am a fan. I helped my cousin to build a house from straw, and it was fun. But if you have to insulate 200,000 prefab houses, then you probably won't use such material. And it is a big challenge that we face, and we need something that can be manufactured industrially and which is scalable. But nothing against the hemp and these natural materials. They've got a niche on the market as well.
Before I pass the floor to Mr. Stepanek, I would like to react, because I remember a sentence said by Sir Rogers, a famous British architect, who got the question about colors. The question was, what colors do you like in your buildings? And he said, if you use natural materials, then the color is not that important. So in other words, if you use concrete, steel and glass, then the buildings can have natural colors. So natural materials such as straw and so on, or the use of natural ventilation systems, for instance. This is what I said at the beginning. We, as users, will have to accept that the standards will go down a little bit, and we will have to accept that we have buildings that consume less energy for operations and for construction, but we have to accept, for instance, that the temperature will not be guaranteed, that in the office there will be more than 30 degrees during a hot day. So it's about our comfort. And if we want to be comfortable 100%, and if we want to have it in all the norms and standards, then we will have to accept industrial production. The natural materials will not probably guarantee these standards and norms respected. And Mr. Stepanek? a comment on BIM. If you have used the software, you know that you can analyze any project to the last item. And we draft strategies that are then put aside, but in the Scandinavian countries, for instance, BIM is a mandatory part of public tenders. And the reason is that it is a major anti-corruption measure. If you look at the project and if you see all the items down to the last nail, then you see immediately that the small nail will not cost 100 euros, logically, or some equipment will not cost 100,000 euros. While when you assess the value of a building as a whole, you cannot see all these details. And I dare say that the reason why BIM is not a part of public tender is that we prefer to have the more comprehensive assessment of the value or of the result. Anybody else? A question? There are no more questions, so thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a nice conference.
Very much for the explanation for why we construct insufficiently.